Hello all, and welcome to my review of Mask of the Rose, the newest entry in the series of games set in the Fallen London universe, with the other three of course being the browser game Fallen London, then Sunless Sea in 2015, and Sunless Skies in 2019. Before I carry on any further into the video, please allow me to first disclose that I was given a free Steam key for this game by Failbetter Games a couple of weeks ago. Furthermore, due to it being a pre-release version of the game I was playing, some aspects shown might have been tweaked a bit by the time release day comes around. The wider Fallen London universe which Mask of the Rose is set in is dark and strange, and while at times terrifying, is also brimming with wonder and whimsy. While both Sunless Sea and Sunless Skies were at their core survival games with strong focus on exploration, trade and combat, they were also known for their remarkably high quality writing, with both games featuring many hundreds of pages of fascinating descriptions, observations and dialogue. In fact, both Sunless Skies and particularly Sunless Sea happen to be two of my all-time favourite games, and this is in large part due to the incredible writing and world building. Thus, when a new game to be set in the Fallen London universe was announced on Kickstarter in February of 2021, I performed a backwards somersault in my living room. Such was my initial excitement, and it looked exactly like this. However, as I read on down the page, my eyes glanced over the words, "Romantic Visual Novel." Romance? I said to myself, still suspended in the air, midway through the somersault. "Well, I'm not sure that'll be my cup of tea at all," I said, before finally landing back on the floor in a crumpled, disappointed heap. I'd just never played any sort of visual novel type thing before, certainly not with a focus on romance, and thus, while I have kept my eye on Mask of the Rose due to my love of the Fallen London universe, I'd be lying if I said I was ever particularly hyped for it, though I knew I'd still give it a shot when it did come round. Well, I have been playing it, and what I will say at this point is that the game pretty much falls in line with what I expected. It has some truly superb writing and a fantastic setting, but at the end of the day I found its appeal and replayability to be quite limited. So, let's get into some specifics and talk about Mask of the Rose. The Mask of the Rose is set in a somewhat recent aftermath of a calamitous event known as the Fall. When the Victorian city of London was swallowed up by a crack in the ground and then transported to the huge, anomalous and mysterious subterranean region known as the Neath. Although there are several flashbacks back to the actual event throughout the story, when the game starts, about 9 months have passed since the fall, and so Londoners have mostly picked up the pieces since the chaos ended and have finally started accepting their new life and the strange conditions which accompany it. The first thing the player does is choose a past for their character, with each coming with their own article of clothing. The game starts with 3 to choose from, and then another 3 which will unlock after completing a run through the story. Clothing is actually quite an important part of Mask of the Rose because although you don't really see your character at any point other than their portrait, wearing specific articles of clothing makes extra dialogue choices become available in conversation, as well as granting access to certain quest lines. I will point out however that although the past you choose at the start can of course not be changed, the clothing associated with different paths can still be obtained regardless of which one you choose. And so, if you're gutted that you missed out on the chance to don that sailor's uniform, don't be, you can still get it. Another important choice to make at the start is to decide what you're looking for in terms of relationships, because Mask of the Rose is all about your relationships with the various characters. Maybe there's someone you'd like a romantic entanglement with, maybe there's someone you can't stand, maybe you're just looking for friendship with no expectation or interest in physical intimacy. You can decide at the start what general interests you have, and this will enable or disable certain options from run to run. For my first run I chose to purely be interested in friendship and pretty much tried to befriend as many people as I could, while on my second run I had some other ideas. We get introduced to 2 of our housemates, Grizz and Archie. Grizz is a friend and employee of the Ministry of Accounting and Recounting, whereas Archie works as a doctor, though the Great Fall occurred before he could finish his training. Archie is also Scottish, like me, and of course they made him ginger, because apparently everyone from Scotland is ginger, If you have a Scottish person in your game, film or show, they have to be ginger, always. The landlady of the house is Horatia, who cooks and cleans for her 3 lodgers, though her character is a bit behind on rent. Before being let loose to explore London, there's a flashback scene taking us back to the day of the fall and the terror which came with it, as the red-end sky was blotted out with bats, the Westminster bells tolled, and the fallen Londoners realised that they'd never again see another sunset. It's a very interesting setting, and as a Sunless Sea fanatic, I love the idea of experiencing the fall and its aftermath from the perspective of an actual character, whereas in Sunless Sea, this event happened many years ago, and Londoners have long since accepted and adapted to the countless eccentricities of the Neath. Before talking about how the game actually plays, let me say that I think it looks pretty great. The backgrounds are very detailed and well drawn, although I would have preferred them to be a bit less static. You might see a light source flickering or smoke coming out of a chimney, but that's generally it. They do look great though, and the Devil's Townhouse in particular is my favourite. There are really cool details here, like the correspondent sigils to the left and the jars of souls to the top right. The art for the characters is also good, but to be honest, I'd prefer it if they were a bit darker in tone. Everyone just looks a bit too nice and bright, whereas I would have liked a bit more grit and nastiness. This is Victorian London after all. I really like the soundtrack though, and they captured that old weird London feel very well. Anyway, after all that introductory stuff, our character is free to get out there a bit and start visiting places. The game gives the player an effective starting task to encourage them to make introductions and build relationships by having us go out and collect some census data from some local characters. Then from here, we can take these to the head of the Ministry of Accounting and Recounting to be exchanged for shiny pennies, which we can use to either repay our long-suffering landlady or buy new hats. The choice is yours. The money aspect of this game left me a wee bit confused, to be honest, because throughout my entire first run of the story, which lasted about 3.5 hours, I made a few pennies within the first 45 minutes or so, and then never made any more money for the remainder of the game, which just seemed kind of odd. The whole census collecting aspect also felt a bit weak too in this regard, because even though you do it a bit at the start and then it's never really relevant again, towards the last stretch of the run you still have the icon for how many censuses you've got on hand, even though that stopped being relevant 2.5 hours ago. It is entirely possible I just missed some opportunities related to money and the census though, because the game's not at all designed for everything to be seen on a single playthrough. There was also another mechanic introduced in the tutorial that I again found quite perplexing, and that's story crafting. Don't get me wrong, the tutorial's not confusing or anything, but I never really understood what the hell I was actually supposed to do with these. I'd complete one of these story trees, the game would tell me that I was ready to hand in, but then there was just nowhere to actually hand it in. Whether this was a bug, or whether I was simply missing something, I don't know. The game wasn't even officially out yet when I was playing it, so I couldn't even look it up. Putting those particular mechanics aside though, once your run gets going, each day follows the same structure, which will repeat until the story concludes. In the morning, you're free to visit one of your known locations to run an errand, then it rolls onto the afternoon where you can run another errand elsewhere, then in the evening you return to the boarding house to eat supper with your housemates and landlady. Speaking to different folk will gradually unlock more locations as your run progresses, or you can unlock specific places by talking to Constable Harjeet. The nature of the errands you engage in can vary widely, of course, based on your current list of tasks, although sometimes you might just want to pay someone a visit to see how they're doing and maybe deepen a friendship or romance. I did find that the extent to which specific locations will actually have much of anything to do with them can depend on early game choices. For example, on my first run I happened to not visit the church early on, and then the game just never gave me another opportunity to visit it for the rest of the run. It was still there on the map screen, I just couldn't go there because there was no errands to run. Similarly, I visited the synagogue once near the start of the game and made my introductions to a couple of important characters, but then there was just never another reason or option to actually return. Thus, from my observations, although there are a bunch of interesting places to visit around London, some certainly seem to be more fleshed out than others, although certainly I imagine results will vary from run to run. The actual characters themselves tend to be very well written, and I am pleased to report that the dialogue and descriptions found here maintain the sky-high standards set by Sunless Sea and Sunless Skies. The city of fallen London is of course Victorian, and indeed the mannerisms, vernacular and certainly the humour all have a distinctly Victorian feel to them. Just as with Sunless Skies, Mask of the Rose can be exceptionally witty, and I definitely laughed out loud more than a few times. At the same time, friendship, romance and Old English charm aside, things can get quite dark and strange from time to time. And indeed, many of the game's strange occurrences and comments will be quickly recognised by fans of Sunless Sea. There are a bunch of references to that game here, but although I am a sucker for a Sunless Sea reference, references at the end of the day is all they really were. Obviously this game is very different to the Sunless games, but one key difference in those games is that there you explore different locations around vast seas and skies, whereas Mask of the Rose is all set in London, being almost entirely centred around interpersonal relationships rather than port reports, violent encounters and other assorted observations. Regarding the actual romance and friendship part of the game, yeah, you're free to do that how you see fit. Through my first run I pretty much just tried to befriend everyone, because why the hell not? The characters are all pretty likeable, or at least interesting, even if not necessarily affable in the traditional sense, and from what I could tell there seemed to be no disadvantage to being everyone's friend. The game frequently gives you the option to consider your relationship with an individual, and then you can either try to bring them closer or push them away depending on how you're feeling, and of course these options come with their own unique dialogue and events. I pretty much always try and be the good guy when playing games, because otherwise I just feel bad. But for my second run I decided to change my personality up a bit, and I made my character as gay as the day is long, and flirted relentlessly with Big Ginger Archie here, and was just a complete arsehole to everyone else, for no reason. And yes, things did indeed get hot and heavy. It makes me kinda curious to see what these more physical interactions are like with the game's more anomalous characters, but then maybe I'm better off not doing. Also, the game's very LGBT friendly, and there's scarcely a character to be found in London that isn't gay or bi or non-binary, so if that's your thing, then there should be plenty to like here in that regard. As far as the whole relationship, romance aspect of the game goes though, it's not for me. Don't get me wrong, this wasn't a surprise or anything, I didn't think I'd be into it, but yeah, I just couldn't get into it, and romance options aren't something I've ever cared about in any video game. I'm not going to spoil anything about how the game ends or anything, but I will say that I found the ending to be a bit sudden and also underwhelming, and I think this is somewhat tied to the fact that there's not really a central plot in Mask of the Rose. You have a setting, a range of locations and characters, and some important events that transpire throughout your run, but with no strong, compelling backbone to tie it all together. And to be honest, after my first run, I wasn't all that desperate to go in for a second. I mainly did it for some extra thoroughness for this review, and to see what effect different dialogue choices had, as well as the romance stuff. Also, the repeated daily structure of a morning errand, an afternoon errand, and then supper start to feel pretty damn repetitive a couple of hours in. The game is all about interesting and believable relationships, yet it's been fitted into this rather uninspired time structure. Maybe it's that some days ended up feeling too short. Sometimes you'll visit someone and be there for a good few minutes before that segment of the day is done, whereas other times your interactions will be far more brief, and then before you know it the day is over and now on to the next day to repeat the cycle. I did enjoy my time with Mask of the Rose, but for me there wasn't enough on offer here to keep me playing, and I'm not sure I'll be picking it up again for another run anytime soon. Furthermore, there didn't really seem to be enough actual content to justify more than a couple of repeated runs from what I could see, unless you're okay with rereading and re-meeting all the same characters to salvage a different interaction here and there. Do take into consideration though that other than the fallen London setting, this was never a game for me, and that's fine. Folk that are into visual novel style games and romance sims might find a real gem here, regardless of whether or not they're familiar with the fallen London universe, but Mask of the Rose just didn't hold all that much appeal for me. I give it 13 bales of Parabola linen out of 29, I don't know. Maybe we'll see a third instalment in the Sunless series one day. Now that'd be for me. But alas. As always, cheers for watching and cheerio.